Hey everybody, in this video I'm going to talk about what I consider quality in starting a piano piece, and this is for students of all levels, total beginner through advanced. And on this channel I hope to share with you strategies, thoughts, insights, etc., often of my own creation, that I hope will help you in your piano playing, hopefully in other areas of your life as well. So here I'm really talking about essentially, the basics or bare essentials in quality, and I bring this up because in my methods, I talk about how instead of tackling some sort of like large section that's too hard, a big part of my methods are about choosing small, easy things. That this is what makes it possible for an intermediate student to play an advanced piece, advanced student to play a professional level piece, or total beginner to play something that would have been completely impossible for them otherwise. Most of the time, it's a big jump in level if people use these methods correctly. And a big part of that, when I ask them to do those tiny little sections, is I'll say like, oh, you have to do it to quality. You have to be able to pass them at a high level. And sometimes I'm asked exactly what that means. So I thought it'd be helpful to make this video. So if you haven't seen my 14 layers of strategy as applied to river flows in you, that's a good introduction. But the really high level view is that instead of tackling a section that's too hard for you, for instance, even an advanced student, they might not memorize an 8 measure or 16 measure both hand area right off the bat of a totally new piece. It's probably going to be that like a 4 measure segment is more reasonable for them to memorize right at the beginning of their piece, because the idea is that we want to do small things that are easy for the person, move on from them rapidly, and then over time they're going to chunk into larger and larger sections through spaced repetition and memory consolidation during sleep. A total beginner, maybe they can't even play both hands at all. And so there's no way that they could do, let's say, 4 measures, both hands. They might have to do like half a measure or even quarter of a measure, separate hands, when they start right off the bat. And in general, it might be that they do, very like small separate hand areas, and they do that in little segments. They move on from each one. They go through the whole page. Then the second time through, they do small separate hand segments. Next time through, they do very small both hand ones, then small both hand sections, then medium, then large, and then the whole thing will come together. But this all hinges on even the fundamental building blocks, even those very smallest sections being good, or what I think to quality. And here I'm not talking about high-level musicality. I'm talking about like a baseline touch. Sometimes I call it my all-loud touch or all-loud with accents touch. If it's a beginner, then we might not do the accents. You can search David Chang, all-loud with accents, if you want to know more details about that, just in terms of, it's just like a nice, weighty, healthy, relaxed, loud touch. And you can leave out the accents if you're a beginner or total beginner. But when you're doing those very small sections right off the bat, I'd say that the parameters mainly are notes, fingering, memory, I think is actually a really good idea. Nice and all loud, stable tempo, so there's no like speeding up, slowing down, like hesitancies especially. And then we also have rhythm and articulation, and it's if at all possible, if those are correct, that would be a fantastic part of this baseline quality touch. Sometimes I'm like a little bit more lenient with those elements depending on the particular student, but the first things that I listed are essentially required. So I would definitely write out the fingering, believe it or not, for every single note first through either the whole piece or at least a large section, maybe the first page or the first large section. And then remember, you have to determine what's easy for you to do. So instead of doing like some large, like let's say a total beginner trying to do, again, 4 measures both hands, maybe they determine they can do like a tiny section, like a half of a measure separate hands or right hand alone, or a quarter of a measure right hand alone. And again, the general idea is that they'll do all these little tiny sections, probably through the entire page, and then using my methodologies, again, if you search David Chang rule of transition, David Chang rule of expansion, David Chang adding in reverse, or you watch the 14 layers of strategy, you will learn how you can go through a large section, such as a whole page, and then those tiny little separate hand sections will coalesce into both hand large sections over time. Those very tiny sections, though, to do them to quality, so you wrote all of the fingering and everything, it's not that hard for adults to learn how to read notes. To read them very quickly maybe is difficult, but to be able to read the treble and bass clef even slowly, it's it's not that difficult to intellectually understand. So when so once they've learned how to teach themselves the treble and bass clef notes, the first thing when they're playing this little quarter of a measure, half a measure, even without a teacher, is to just very carefully double, triple, quadruple check the notes, that they're in the right octave and everything. Of course, they might need to, look at an online resource, or maybe they want to ask a teacher for help. But basically, they want to be very careful to read the notes correctly. Account for the key signature, account for accidentals, account for the correct octave, account for them literally reading the note names correctly. So that has to be a given in terms of, this baseline quality, of course. Second thing is that, assuming that the fingering they wrote is good, either they have enough knowledge on their own, or they consult an online resource, or they consulted their teacher, they've really got to make sure that that fingering is correct. Any kind of inconsistencies in fingering, it can mess up your muscle memory, your mental imagery, you're recording different coordinations. So the fingering, double, triple, quadruple, quintuple check that is correct. And like I said before, it's really fantastic if you memorize from the start. First of all, because it's great to be able to sit down at any random piano and perform your music from memory, even without your sheet music, obviously, or you go over somebody's house, or they come over your place, and you can just perform the piece. But even if you were to play from the sheet music in the end, great sight readers, they are able to look at section of music, essentially instantly memorize this little tiny chunk, and they're playing that part while they're looking ahead at the next area of their sheet music. So memorizing little tiny chunks, it's the friend of both playing from memory and reading from the sheet music, paradoxically, believe it or not. And if you play these little tiny chunks from memory from the beginning, and you follow my logical methodology, like the 14 layers of strategy mostly talk about, the memory will really start to link together almost on its own, because you're recording tiny little correct coordinations and moving on from them using spaced repetition, getting that memory consolidation during sleep. So it's so important that you're memorizing from the beginning, and try not to just look at the music and play it over and over again. Try to look at the music and then don't look at the music, make an attempt from memory, and if you forget what it is that you're doing, then you can check the music and learn specifically what it is that you forgot, right? It's like an assessment instead of an open book test. So it's from memory. I think that was the third thing. So we have the notes, we have the fingering, we have the from memory. So I feel like these are under one's control. It's not hard for adults to read notes correctly or to follow fingering consistently, as long as they're careful overall. If you need some help initially, that's of course totally fine. From memory, you need to choose a section, maybe you need a quarter of a measure instead of a half, that you can keep 3 notes or 5 notes in your short-term memory even. And then the next thing would be, let's see, I know that I said tempo. Oh yeah, and then the all loud touch. So if you search David Chang all loud, the simplified version is just that you're playing a nice, weighty, relaxed loud. There's other videos on my channel. If you search David Chang holding and relaxing, David Chang hand shape and orientation, there's other videos for healthy piano playing. But let's assume that you're not getting sore, you're not hurting yourself, because that's very important, and you're relaxed enough, and basically you're playing a nice, confident loud. That's what I would recommend starting off, even for advanced students, the vast majority of the time. So you're playing a nice, weighty, neutral loud, basically healthy loud. And then the tempo, and this is really important, no hesitations at all. No checking because it's from memory also. No waiting before the next one. No tiny little gap before if you're playing half of a measure, you don't want to hesitate slightly on the third note or something like that. No speeding up or slowing down. No waiting or slight uncertainty. Be strict here. If you can't do this with the half measure area, then do just a quarter of a measure. And in my methodology, I use sets, what I call sets. So a half measure set would be half a measure plus the next beat. A quarter measure set would be a quarter of a measure plus the next beat or the next note. So then just go smaller, and almost all of the time, even if it's a total beginner, as long as they learn to release tension, again, you can search David Chang holding and relaxing if that helps you, they should be able to play separate hands, a few notes. That is, for most people, is doable. If it's not doable for you, that's of course totally okay. Then you probably would need to get a teacher or seek some more resources, hopefully on my channel as well too, in order to help yourself. So So those things are pretty much like a given. Hopefully you can tell yourself, like, are you stopping? You can record yourself too to see, like, are you hesitating? Are you speeding up? You might need some help, but for the most people are usually able to tell if they're like being super hesitant, if they're waiting before the next note. So again, we have like notes, we have fingering, we have from memory, we have this all loud, nice, weighty, relaxed touch, and we have, what was the last thing? Non-articulate, just not hesitating, right? Just a stable tempo, not waiting, not speeding up, not slowing down. So we have these things. Now you might wonder, like, hey David, like, why aren't you saying rhythm is like an absolute, or articulation is an absolute? I would say rhythm ideally is an absolute almost all of the time, but sometimes I'll have students choose like a really, really syncopated pop piece, for instance, where it's, a 16th note, then an 8th note, then another 16th note tied to another 16th note. And sometimes if they don't get this exactly right, I'm actually okay with it. We're going to work on that later. So that might surprise you, but for the most part, yeah, if it's possible for the rhythm to be correct, and rhythm means the relation of the notes to each other, like a quarter note is twice as long as an 8th note. A half note is twice as long as a quarter note. If it's a simple rhythm, hopefully that can be part of the hard requirements as well. If it's a really complex rhythm, then maybe you can allow a little bit of leeway. I mean, I do sometimes for some students. And then articulation. Articulation is really whether notes are connected or detached, or there's different types of touch associated with their length. So a lot of the time, this may be a hard requirement as well. A lot of pop pieces, like River Flows in You or something, essentially all the notes are connected together. A lot of pop pieces, all the notes are connected together. A lot of classical pieces too. Sometimes if the articulation is really complicated, like this note's connected to the next one, but this one's detached, and then this one's like half detached, and then this one's connected to the next one, and then you got to hold this one while you let go of the other one. Sometimes I'm a little bit more lenient there as well. But yeah, ideally the articulation is also correct. So yeah, so those are the parameters. So you really want to be strict with yourself. I would much rather that you have a very tiny section that is, again, the notes, fingering, memory. I don't know why I'm not remembering in the moment. The tempo, of course, and the all out touch, and ideally the rhythm and the articulation also are all there. I'd rather that within a quarter of a measure right hand alone than half a measure and it's like okay. I would rather an eighth of a measure, just like two notes or three, whatever an eighth of a measure would be, whether it's two notes or three notes. I would rather that, and there's no hesitating at all. It's perfectly smooth, rather than like, four notes or something and there's like a tiny hesitancy. Be kind to yourself, but be strict as well, because the quality of those puzzle pieces is what's going to determine like if you can piece the puzzle together. So it's fine if you start from the barest bones, like you start from the atomic elements really, but if the initial construction of those puzzle pieces is too flawed, it'll be difficult or impossible to link everything together. So that's where, if you have a teacher or if you want to reach out for one of our programs, that's awesome. We'll definitely be able to help. If you're on your own, you got to be your own teacher. So definitely be kind yet strict with yourself. All right, hope this helps in terms of understanding what I mean by baseline quality as we're starting off. Let me know if you have questions. And if you did find this helpful, please like, subscribe, let people know about the channel. And looking forward to the next one.